just describe how far away your reading levels had got to. And I was always on the white books. My best friends were always on the yellow books or the green books. They were so far ahead. And I think at that stage, those moments of doubt just pop into your head. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not. Why am I not like the others? I think when you're in the classroom, those moments are they're very defining.
They lied to your face. For years, the royal family smiled, waved, and kept their darkest secrets locked away. But now the walls are crashing down. Explosive new evidence has just surfaced, and the names attached to it will leave you absolutely speechless. We are talking about people you never expected, people who were right there the entire time. Beatrice, Eugenie, and secrets so shocking that even the palace cannot spin their way out of this one. Everything is about to change. You need to watch every single second of this, because once you know, you cannot unknow it.
To just try and raise awareness and shine a spotlight on an issue, and also on the wonderful people who are doing amazing things within the field, I think was so important to my family and to me.
There are moments in public life when the weight of accumulated evidence becomes so significant that ignoring it starts to feel like a deliberate choice. That is the situation many observers now find themselves describing when it comes to the allegations surrounding Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, and his long-documented connections to the convicted sex offender and financier Jeffrey Epstein. It is a story that has been building for years, resurfacing in waves, and each time it does, the questions it raises seem to grow harder to answer and harder to dismiss. To understand where things stand today, it helps to go back to Epstein himself. Jeffrey Epstein was an American financier who over several decades cultivated an extraordinary network of powerful and wealthy individuals across politics, finance, and the arts. He was convicted in 2008 in Florida on charges of procuring a minor for prostitution and served just 13 months in prison under a widely criticized plea deal. He was arrested again in July 2019 on federal charges of sex trafficking of minors and died in his prison cell the following month, in circumstances officially ruled as suicide, though that ruling has never fully satisfied his critics or the public. Following his death, a significant body of documents began to emerge through American court proceedings. These documents, widely referred to as the Epstein files, have gradually been made public and contain a substantial amount of information about the people Epstein communicated with, traveled with, and conducted business with over the years. Among the names that appear repeatedly in these files is that of Prince Andrew. The connection between Andrew and Epstein is not new information. The Duke of York was photographed with Epstein on multiple occasions, visited his properties in New York and elsewhere, and has himself acknowledged that the two men had a friendship. In 2019, Andrew gave a now infamous interview to the BBC's Newsnight programme in which he attempted to address the allegations publicly. The interview was broadly considered a disaster, and within days he had stepped back from royal duties. He has not returned to official public life since. But what the Epstein files have added to this story is a level of detail that goes beyond what was previously confirmed or widely reported. Among the material contained within those documents are references to travel arrangements, financial exchanges, and communications that suggest the nature of the connection between Andrew and Epstein's wider network was more involved than a simple social acquaintance. Epstein ran what has been described by American prosecutors as a sex trafficking operation, in which young women and girls were recruited, manipulated, and abused. Some of the victims have spoken on the record about their experiences, and some have named Prince Andrew in their accounts. One of the most discussed elements in this context is Epstein's use of private aircraft. The Lolita Express, as it became known in press reporting, was not simply one plane, but reportedly a fleet of private jets used by Epstein to transport himself, his associates, and according to prosecutors, some of the women and girls who were victims of his trafficking operation. Documents and flight logs examined by journalists and lawyers in the United States suggest that a significant number of flights came and went between America and the United Kingdom during the period of Andrew's association with Epstein. According to reporting on the files, some of those on board these flights allegedly travelled onward to royal residences. These are allegations that have not been proven in a court of law. That distinction matters and should not be glossed over. Prince Andrew has consistently denied any wrongdoing. He settled a civil lawsuit brought by Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's accusers, in 2022 without admitting liability. The terms of that settlement were not disclosed in full, though reports at the time suggested a substantial financial agreement was reached. Andrew's legal team has maintained that the settlement was not an admission of guilt and that he continues to deny the specific allegations made against him. However, the fact that allegations have not been proven does not mean they are without substance or that they should not be subject to proper scrutiny. That is precisely the argument, being made by a growing number of commentators, legal experts, and politicians. The evidence contained in the Epstein files, they argue, is not circumstantial gossip. It is documentary material that has been placed before American courts and made available as a matter of public record. Adding further pressure to this picture is the name of Peter Mandelson, the former British Cabinet Minister and European Commissioner. Mandelson's name has also appeared in connection with the Epstein files, and a separate set of allegations has emerged around his conduct. According to reporting on the documents, emails show that Mandelson received financial information of a sensitive nature from Epstein's circle, and that there were communications suggesting a closer relationship with Epstein's network than Mandelson has publicly acknowledged. Mandelson has denied wrongdoing and has disputed the characterization of his relationship with Epstein. What is notable and what has drawn particular comment is that the police in the United Kingdom moved relatively quickly to open an official criminal investigation into the allegations against Mandelson. That decision was taken, according to reports, within a matter of days of the relevant material becoming prominent in public discussion. The Crown Prosecution Service, under its director Stephen Parkinson, has stated publicly that no one is above the law. That is a principle few would argue with in the abstract. The contrast between the speed of that decision and the apparent absence of any equivalent announcement regarding Prince Andrew is something that a number of people have begun to find difficult to explain away. The nature of the allegations in both cases draws on similar material from similar sources. The Epstein files do not distinguish between titles or positions when it comes to the names recorded within them, and yet the response from law enforcement in the two cases has, at least on the surface, followed a very different timeline. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has also entered the public conversation on this matter, noting the volume of flights documented in connection with Epstein's network and their apparent connection to Britain. That a figure of Brown's standing has chosen to speak publicly about this suggests that the pressure on official bodies to respond is no longer coming only from media commentators or campaign groups, but from people who held the highest levels of public office. The royal family, meanwhile, has said very little. The institution that has historically relied on dignity and restraint as its public face has so far offered no substantial statement addressing the growing body of material that touches directly on one of its most senior members. That silence, as several observers have noted, is itself becoming part of the story. One of the most persistent questions surrounding the Prince Andrew situation is not simply about what he may or may not have done, it is about why, given the volume of material now in the public domain, the police in the United Kingdom have not yet announced a formal criminal investigation. That question is being asked with increasing frequency, and the answers being offered are beginning to feel less and less satisfactory to a growing number of people who have been following this story closely. To be fair to those who have defended the pace at which law enforcement is moving, there is a reasonable argument to be made for caution. Investigating a member of the royal family is not a routine matter. The Duke of York is the brother of the reigning monarch, King Charles III. Any decision to open a formal criminal investigation into someone of that standing carries with it enormous institutional and constitutional weight. If the police were to announce such an investigation and subsequently find that their evidence was insufficient to support charges, the damage to all parties involved, including the credibility of the process itself, would be significant. The argument, in short, is that the police need to be certain before they act, and certainty takes time. That argument has some merit. It would be unreasonable to expect law enforcement to rush into a decision of this magnitude without ensuring that their position is legally sound. No serious observer is suggesting that Andrew should be treated recklessly or that due process should be abandoned in favour of public pressure. The rule of law applies to everyone, including the Duke of York, and that cuts both ways. It means he is entitled to the same standard of investigation that anyone else would receive, conducted properly and thoroughly. The difficulty, however, is that the evidence in question has not suddenly materialised. Much of the material now being discussed in the context of the Epstein files has been in circulation in various forms for a considerable period of time. Authors, journalists, and researchers have been writing about Andrew's connections to Epstein's network for years. Books examining the relationship between the two men and the broader questions about Andrew's conduct have been published and widely reviewed. The financial irregularities that have been reported in connection with Andrew, including questions about a sum of around £1.3 million that arose during a High Court case in 2022, are not new discoveries. Reports of payments allegedly connected to Andrew's introductions of foreign business interests, including water companies operating in Kazakhstan and Greece, have appeared in credible press outlets over an extended period. None of this is to say that all of these reports are accurate or that every allegation is well-founded. Allegations, as has already been noted, are not convictions, but the sheer accumulation of reported concerns, spread across multiple years and multiple sources, raises a legitimate question about whether the appropriate investigative response has been proportionate to the available material. And that question becomes sharper when set against the backdrop of what happened with Peter Mandelson. The decision to open a formal criminal investigation into Mandelson appears, based on available reporting, to have been reached relatively quickly after the relevant material became a matter of prominent public discussion. Reports suggest this happened within roughly 2 days. The basis for that investigation draws on some of the same Epstein file material that also touches on Andrew. The Crown Prosecution Service, as mentioned, has been explicit in stating that no individual is exempt from the law. If that principle was applied briskly in Mandelson's case, the question of why it appears to be moving more slowly in Andrew's case is one that deserves a direct answer. The most uncomfortable explanation, and one that is now being raised openly rather than only in private, is that there is a degree of deference operating within the system when it comes to the royal family. This is not an entirely unfamiliar phenomenon in British public life. There have been previous occasions when investigations touching on royal matters have been handled in ways that later attracted criticism. One example that has been cited in this context is the investigation into theft from royal residences, in which it was reported that police were prepared to proceed, but that intervention from the palace, specifically a late recollection by the late Queen Elizabeth II about having granted permission for certain items to be taken, effectively closed down the inquiry. It was also reported that at least one police officer's career suffered as a consequence of the direction that investigation took. That precedent is relevant because it illustrates that the relationship between law enforcement and the royal household is not always a straightforward application of equal treatment under the law. Institutions have interests, and those interests can shape the behavior of individuals within them, sometimes consciously and sometimes not. A police officer or a senior official considering the implications of moving against the king's brother is operating in a context that is different from the context surrounding an investigation into a retired politician, however senior that politician may have been. There is also the matter of the royal protection officers, the police detectives whose specific job it is to accompany members of the royal family at virtually all times. These individuals would, by the nature of their role, have been present during the travels and activities that are now the subject of scrutiny. They would have seen things, heard things, and in some cases recorded things as part of their professional duties. They are, in principle, witnesses of considerable potential significance. It has been reported, however, that some of these officers have received correspondence reminding them of their confidentiality obligations. The timing of such reminders, at a moment when their testimony could be directly relevant to a serious investigation, has been noted as a concern by several commentators. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Mark Rowley, has not made any public statement that directly addresses the question of what guidance has been given to royal protection officers in relation to this matter, or what steps are being taken to ensure that their knowledge is made available to investigators. There is also a more immediate and practical concern that has been raised about the timeline of any potential investigation. Prince Andrew has been staying at the Royal Lodge in Windsor, largely out of public view. Questions have been asked about his status as a potential flight risk. Unlike Mandelson, whose homes were subject to what were described as dawn raids by police, there does not appear to have been any equivalent action taken in relation to Andrew's property or correspondence. If evidence exists in physical or digital form that could be relevant to an investigation, the longer the delay before action is taken, the greater the risk that such evidence could be moved, damaged, or destroyed. There have been reports suggesting that some material may already have been lost, and that this could in itself give rise to questions about interference with the course of justice. The parliamentarians who have begun to ask formal questions about this situation are not, on the whole, fringe voices. They represent a cross-party recognition that the way this matter is being handled is starting to raise questions that go beyond the specifics of any individual allegation. Gordon Brown, whose political career spanned the highest levels of British government, has spoken publicly about the flights connected to Epstein's network and their link to Britain. The fact that a former Prime Minister has felt it necessary to enter this conversation publicly is itself an indicator of how far the pressure has spread beyond the usual commentariat. Stephen. Parkinson's statement that no one is above the law is correct as a statement of principle. The question that many are now asking is whether that principle is being applied with the same consistency across all the individuals named in the same body of evidence. The answer to that question, whatever it turns out to be, matters not just for this specific case, but for the broader confidence that ordinary people place in the institutions that are supposed to serve them equally, regardless of rank, title, or proximity to the Crown. While the questions surrounding police inaction continue to grow louder, a parallel and equally significant story has been developing around the response of the royal family itself. Institutions facing serious reputational challenges have a choice to make. They can engage with the crisis directly, acknowledge the concerns being raised, and take visible steps to demonstrate that they are committed to transparency and accountability. Or they can retreat behind the language of process, wait for events to unfold, and hope that the storm passes without requiring them to say anything of substance. The British royal family, it is increasingly being argued, has chosen the second path, and that choice is beginning to carry its own costs. The king has not spoken publicly about his brother's situation in any meaningful way. There has been no address to the nation, no statement from Buckingham Palace that engages directly with the material contained in the Epstein files, and no visible effort from within the institution to put clear distance between the monarchy as a functioning body and the allegations that continue to accumulate around the Duke of York. What has emerged instead is a pattern of silence, punctuated occasionally by the voices of royal commentators and former officials, some of whom have appeared in broadcast media to suggest that it would be inappropriate for the king to say anything while a potential police investigation might be pending. That argument has been described by a number of observers as a convenient shield rather than a principled position. The logic, as it is sometimes presented, is that speaking publicly about the matter could in some way compromise an investigation or prejudice legal proceedings. But critics of this position point out that no formal criminal investigation has actually been announced. Using the possibility of a future investigation as a reason for present silence is, in their view, a way of avoiding accountability without technically refusing to engage. It is a holding position dressed up as responsible restraint. There is a historical parallel that several commentators have reached for in trying to illustrate what a more effective royal response might look like. When Princess Diana died in Paris in August 1997, the initial response of the royal family was widely judged to be deeply misjudged. The family remained in Scotland. The flag above Buckingham Palace was not lowered. No statement came quickly enough, or with sufficient warmth, to match the extraordinary public grief that had gripped the country. As the days passed, the disconnect between the institution and the public mood became increasingly stark, and there were genuine concerns at the time about the damage being done to the monarchy's standing. Eventually, and by most accounts reluctantly, Queen Elizabeth II returned to London and delivered a televised address to the nation. The speech acknowledged the loss, spoke to the public mood, and did a great deal to stabilise what had been becoming a genuinely threatening situation for the institution. The point is not that the two situations are identical. They are not. But the underlying dynamic, a royal institution failing to read the room and allowing a crisis to deepen through inaction, carries uncomfortable similarities to what is being observed today. The argument being made by those who are critical of the current approach is that the king does not need to prejudge any legal process, does not need to make specific accusations or admissions, and does not need to throw his brother to the wolves. What he could do, these observers suggest, is speak to the nation in terms that acknowledge the seriousness of the situation, demonstrate that the institution understands why the public is troubled, and make clear that the monarchy is not placing itself above the principles of transparency and accountability that apply to everyone else. There are specific steps that have been suggested as part of a more credible response from the palace. One of the most frequently cited is the question of the people who travelled with Prince Andrew during the periods now under scrutiny. Royal protection officers, personal staff, queries and valets would all have accompanied him on the trips that are now being examined. These individuals would have direct, first-hand knowledge of what took place, who was present, and what was observed. The argument being made is that the king should publicly confirm that all such individuals are being encouraged or formally directed to make themselves available to the police and to share everything they know without restriction. Related to this is the question of internal royal correspondence. Over the years, it has been reported that complaints about Prince Andrew's conduct were made to his mother, the late Queen, and to the senior officials who managed the private affairs of the household. If such complaints were received and documented, the material in which they are recorded could be of considerable relevance to any investigation. The call from critics is for the palace to confirm that all such correspondence will be made available to law enforcement without any attempt to withhold or delay its disclosure. The absence of any such commitment in the current climate is itself being read as significant. The issue of confidentiality obligations placed on royal protection officers has already been raised in the context of the police investigation, but it is equally relevant when considering the royal family's responsibilities. These officers work within the Metropolitan Police and report through its command structure, but the practical circumstances of their role mean that their professional lives are deeply intertwined with the household they protect. Reports that some officers have received communications reminding them of their duties of confidentiality at precisely the moment when their testimony could be most consequential have raised serious concerns. If the palace were genuinely committed to full cooperation with any investigation, the expectation from critics is that it would be taking the opposite approach, actively encouraging those individuals to speak freely rather than reminding them of constraints that could have the effect of limiting what they say. There is also a broader concern about what some observers have described as a pattern of complicity within the royal official family. This goes beyond the king's personal response to the current crisis. The allegation, made carefully but persistently by several commentators who have written and researched extensively on the subject, is that other members of the royal family were aware over a significant period of time that there were serious questions about Andrew's conduct and chose not to act on that knowledge in any meaningful way. The late Queen was reportedly made aware of concerns about her son on more than one occasion. Senior household officials were said to have received complaints. None of this produced any visible consequence for Andrew's position or activities until the Newsnight interview in 2019 made his continued public role untenable. The question of Princess Eugenie and Princess Beatrice has also begun to attract greater attention. Both of Andrew's daughters have been described by some who have investigated this story as having been more closely involved in their father's various activities and associations than has so far been publicly acknowledged. These are not accusations of wrongdoing on their part, and that distinction is important. But the suggestion that the picture of Andrew as operating in isolation from his immediate family, with no one around him fully aware of the nature of his conduct, may not be entirely accurate, is one that is beginning to receive more serious consideration in public discussion. Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, is another figure whose position in relation to this story has come under renewed scrutiny. Despite her divorce from Andrew in 1996, the two have remained close and have continued to share aspects of their lives, including their residence at the Royal Lodge. Questions are being asked about her own activities and associations during the relevant periods, and there is a growing view among some commentators that she ought to be seriously questioned as part of any thorough investigation, not necessarily because she is suspected of criminal wrongdoing, but because she may hold information that is relevant to a full understanding of what took place. What ties all of these threads together is a single underlying concern, which is that the official response from the royal institution to a mounting crisis is not matching the scale of what is being alleged. The monarchy derives its position not only from constitutional tradition, but from a relationship of trust with the public. That trust is not unconditional, and it is not immune to damage. The longer the institution chooses silence over engagement, and the longer it allows the perception to grow that it is prioritizing self-protection over accountability, the more that trust is put at risk. The crisis, as several commentators have now said plainly, is not one that has been imposed on the royal family from outside. It is one that has been allowed to develop and in some respects actively enabled from within. At some point, the accumulation of evidence, the pattern of delays and the growing chorus of voices demanding accountability have to translate into concrete action. That is the central argument now being made by an increasing number of people who have been following this story from its earliest stages to the present day. The question is no longer really about whether there is enough material to justify a formal criminal investigation into Prince Andrew. For many observers, that threshold was crossed some time ago. The question now is about what happens next, who takes responsibility for making it happen, and what the consequences will be if nothing does. The most immediate and straightforward demand being made is that the Metropolitan Police announce a full, official criminal investigation into the Duke of York. This is not a call for a verdict. It is not a demand that he be found guilty of anything before any evidence has been tested in a legal setting. It is simply a call for the process that exists in a functioning democracy to be applied, consistently and without favour. An official criminal investigation is the mechanism through which allegations of this seriousness are examined, witnesses are interviewed under the appropriate legal framework, evidence is gathered and assessed, and a determination is made about whether charges are warranted. That process has not yet been formally initiated in relation to Andrew, and the absence of it is becoming increasingly difficult to justify in the eyes of those who have watched it move more quickly in comparable cases involving other prominent individuals. The point about comparable cases is worth dwelling on. The principle of equality before the law is not a complicated one. It means that the same standards, the same thresholds, and the same timelines should apply to everyone regardless of who they are or what position they hold. When that principle appears to be operating inconsistently, confidence in the institutions responsible for upholding it begins to erode. That erosion is not an abstract concern. It is something that affects the relationship between ordinary citizens and the state in a very practical and tangible way. People who feel that the rules are applied differently depending on how powerful or well-connected you are do not simply shrug and move on. They lose faith in the system, and that loss of faith has consequences that extend well beyond any individual case. The call for a formal police investigation is also connected to a more specific and urgent concern about Prince Andrew's current circumstances. He has been largely confined to the Royal Lodge in Windsor, out of the public eye, with limited information available about his day-to-day movements or activities. Several commentators have raised the question of whether he represents a flight risk. The concern is not hypothetical. There are individuals in British legal history who have been the subject of serious allegations, delayed proceedings, and who ultimately left the country in circumstances that made bringing them to justice significantly more complicated. The absence of any formal legal status, such as being named as a subject of a criminal investigation or being required to surrender a travel document, means that nothing currently prevents Andrew from travelling freely. Whether or not that risk is considered credible by law enforcement, the failure to address it publicly adds to the sense that the situation is not being handled with the urgency it deserves. A further concern that has been raised by those watching this case closely relates to the preservation of evidence. Unlike Peter Mandelson, whose properties were subject to police searches at an early stage of the investigation into his conduct, there has been no visible equivalent action taken in relation to Andrew's residence or personal records. Evidence in cases of this nature can exist in many forms, including physical documents, digital communications, financial records, and personal correspondence. The longer the gap between the emergence of serious allegations and the initiation of formal investigative steps, the greater the risk that relevant material could be moved, altered, or lost entirely. There have been suggestions in some reporting that certain material connected to this case may already have been compromised, and that this possibility could itself give rise to questions about interference with the course of justice. These are serious concerns that reinforce the argument for immediate and decisive action rather than continued waiting. Beyond the question of a police investigation into Andrew personally, there is a broader and in some ways more far-reaching demand being made for a parliamentary inquiry. The argument here is that the conduct of Prince Andrew during his years as the United Kingdom's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment, a role he held from 2001 until his resignation in 2011, raises questions that go well beyond what a criminal investigation alone could adequately address. His role as trade envoy gave him access to governments, business figures, and official resources that would not otherwise have been available to him. The question of how that access was used, who benefited from it, and whether it was ever deployed in ways that were inappropriate or contrary to the public interest, is one that deserves systematic and transparent examination. Specific concerns have been raised about Andrew's activities in Kazakhstan, Libya, China, and other countries where he made visits or facilitated introductions in his capacity as trade envoy. Reports have described situations in which meetings were arranged between Andrew and foreign officials or business figures in circumstances that raise questions about the nature of the interests being served. There are accounts of individuals being shoehorned into meetings with heads of state or senior officials through connections facilitated by Andrew and his associates. The names of specific business figures who are said to have benefited from these introductions have appeared in press reporting, and the organizations that were supposed to oversee and account for the trade envoy role have been criticized for a lack of transparency about how it was conducted. A parliamentary inquiry would have powers that a standard police investigation does not. It could compel testimony, examine documents, and produce a public record of findings that would allow citizens to understand what happened and what systems failed to prevent it. The former heads of UK Trade and Investment, the body that nominally oversaw Andrew's work in this area, have reportedly been reluctant to discuss their experiences or what they observed during that period. A parliamentary process could change that calculation significantly. The National Crime Agency, which deals with serious and organised crime, including financial crime, could also potentially have a role to play if the CERTO evidence gathered points in directions that are relevant to its remit. The scope of accountability being called for does not stop with Andrew himself. One of the recurring themes in this story, and one that has not received as much attention as it perhaps deserves, is the question of the people around him who enabled, facilitated, or turned a blind eye to conduct that should have triggered concern. An organisation like a royal household does not operate in a vacuum. There are staff, advisors, officials, and support structures surrounding every senior member of the royal family. The suggestion that problematic behaviour could have continued over many years without anyone in those structures being aware of it or having questions about it is one that is difficult to accept at face value. The bills for massage treatments that were reportedly charged to the public purse and approved by individuals travelling with Andrew represent one relatively small but telling example of a wider dynamic. If those approvals were given, then people knew. And if people knew about even the relatively minor irregularities, it becomes harder to maintain that no one had any awareness of anything more serious. The question of who knew what and when, and what they did or did not do with that knowledge, is one that accountability processes should be designed to answer. Fergie, as Sarah Ferguson is widely known, remains a figure whose position in relation to all of this has not been fully explored in public. The two have maintained a close personal relationship despite their divorce nearly 3 decades ago, and they have continued to share the Royal Lodge as their primary residence. Ferguson has had her own financial difficulties and controversies over the years, and questions are now being raised about whether her activities during relevant periods and her proximity to Andrew throughout mean that she has information or involvement that warrants serious examination. Again, this is not a claim of criminal wrongdoing on her part. It is a recognition that a thorough process of accountability cannot simply draw a line around one individual and treat everyone in their immediate orbit as irrelevant. The position of Princesses Eugenie and Beatrice is perhaps the most sensitive aspect of this broader picture. They are Andrew's daughters, and public discussion of their potential involvement in or knowledge of their father's activities has to be approached with appropriate care. But the suggestion that has been made by several people who have researched this story in depth, that they were more intertwined with their father's world than the public account has so far reflected, is not one that can be simply set aside because it is uncomfortable. If a full and genuine process of accountability is to take place, it has to follow the evidence wherever it leads, and it has to do so regardless of family connections or the sensitivity of the names involved. It is also worth considering what a properly conducted process of accountability would mean for the wider culture of protection and privilege that this story has repeatedly exposed. The Epstein network did not operate in a vacuum either. It functioned because powerful people in multiple countries provided cover, access, and silence. Some of that cover was active and deliberate. Some of it may have been passive, a matter of people choosing not to ask questions they suspected might have uncomfortable answers. Either way, the network depended on a surrounding environment in which certain individuals were treated as untouchable, and in which the normal mechanisms of scrutiny and accountability were either not applied or were quietly discouraged. Addressing that broader culture is as important as addressing any individual case within it. What all of this amounts to is a test. Not just of the police, not just of the Crown Prosecution Service, not just of the royal family, but of the entire framework of institutions and processes that are supposed to ensure that serious allegations are taken seriously and that the pursuit of truth and justice is not shaped by the social or constitutional standing of those being examined. Every day that passes without a formal investigation being announced, every week that goes by without a parliamentary process being established, and every public statement that prioritises caution over clarity adds to the impression that the framework is not working as it should. The people who have been most directly harmed by the conduct alleged in this story are the women who have spoken on the record about what happened to them. Their accounts are documented, their names are known, and their willingness to come forward, despite the enormous personal cost of doing so, represents an act of considerable courage. They did not do so lightly, and they did not do so without understanding the scale of the forces ranged against them. The institutions of a democratic society have an Untold obligation to those women that goes beyond words of acknowledgement or expressions of sympathy. It requires action, and it requires that the action taken be genuine, thorough, and applied with exactly the same rigour that would be brought to bear on anyone else, regardless of title, rank, or proximity to the Crown. That process needs to begin, and it needs to begin now.